morning. This is Connie Swain, the Connector, connecting you with all the information you need. And today I'm going to be talking about the process of buying raw land. We've had a lot of people come out to Wise County looking at land, and I actually love going out and showing them the land and showing them Wise County. I just love it out here. So today that's what we're going to be talking about. Raw land comes in all shapes and sizes. There's all kinds of price points. You can look at some with improvements, some that have no improvements, which by that I mean some may have a well and septic or fence, partial fence, maybe a few buildings or an old building. Some has none of that. It's just raw land. But you have to look at your budget and your cash on hand. But keep in mind, there is a rule of thumb that a lot of people don't understand. The smaller the tract of land, the higher the price per acre. It no longer do you have, you're going to pay X amount per acre, and it's that regardless of the size. So the larger the tract of land, the less of a price per acre. So if you're not an experienced land purchaser, just keep that in mind and don't worry about how many acres you want. You have to look at your budget. In Wise County, in order to maintain an ag exemption, you have to have over 6 acres. In Montague and other counties, you have to have 10 acres or more. But in order to do that, there's just a lot to it, and I can connect you with that kind of information as well. I have those on my YouTube channel. But let's talk about this and get into it. So you have to determine, are you going to build on it soon, or will you be sitting on it for a while before you build? Keep in mind that even with an ag exemption, you will have to pay the taxes every year. So you've got to keep that in mind too if you decide to sit on it. So make a list of what you want to do and then start the process. The very first thing, and people don't understand this, if you do not have the cash to purchase land, to pay cash for it, you have to have a loan. And of course that makes sense, but you really need to speak to a lender and get pre-approved before you even look. It's so sad to have people thinking they can afford a certain amount just from talking to people, or they've tried to calculate it online or even thinking within their budget, only to find out they do not qualify. There's a lot of information that goes into the qualification process when you're buying something that is not going to be your homestead. It's secondary property. It's a lot more expensive, and the what you have to put down, all of those things come into play. So you've got to talk to a lender first. So I highly suggest you connect with a lender that specializes in financing raw land. There's local banks, credit unions, there's things like Texas Ag Farm Credit, Lone Star Ag Credit, Capital Farm Credit. Those kinds of places will finance raw land. But you've got to keep in mind that those interest rates and down payments and all that are going to be different than a traditional loan. So find one that specializes in raw land. I also highly, highly, highly recommend you find a lender that is local to the area you're purchasing in. And the reason is because usually they're used to dealing with it and they can press it through a lot quicker. Even if you have your personal or even business checking accounts with some of the larger banks, they are more than, the larger national banks, they are more than happy to help you with a local land loan. And they are used to all the nuances, so they can process it through a lot quicker. If you don't have a local bank that you think you could work with or you're not familiar with, then find a realtor in that area and have them connect you with the ones they know will do these kinds of loans. So you've got to get pre-approved. Once you're pre-approved, then you know what you can afford. And that goes back to the budget and how many acres. I recently showed a piece of property to a couple, and it was 10 acres, and the it was priced about midpoint to what 10 acres of worth of land is going for now. And I found out later that they are not approved for anything close to that. And, you know, I wish I would have found out before I went out there, and not for any other reason other than it kind of wasted our time, their time, and my time. So if you find out you're pre-approved for a certain amount, then you know what to look for. So get pre-approved. When you're getting pre-approved, look about, you know, talk to them about what your closing costs are going to be. You're going to have cash in the bank that you can write a check on or wire transfer to the title company at closing. And you have to have that in the bank at some point during the process. You can't just magically appear, or it can't just magically appear. So you have to have the down payment. On traditional land loans, that's usually 20%. So it's a good chunk of land. So for instance, if you're going to pay $100,000 for a tract of land, you've got to have $20,000 that's easily available, either in some kind of an account that you can withdraw from, or your bank account, and that has to be there ready, and that's part of the pre-approval process. Also, ask them, you know, what it's going to cost for you to purchase the land, the closing costs, as well as excuse me, as well as what your monthly payment's going to be. Once you get pre-approved, you cannot make any major changes to your financial situation. You have to stay at the same job for the 30 days it takes to close. You have to, you can't move money around. You can't do any of those kinds of things. You can't make major purchases. So make sure that you keep your financial situation the same. Now that you're ready to move forward, it's time to connect with a local realtor. You may already have one in mind, or you may look for one, but if you're wanting to buy in North Texas, I would love to help you. My contact information is part of this video. But find one you can trust and work with. I have had clients that were not comfortable with working with me only because I'm really close friends with relatives. I totally understand that. We are bound by confidentiality. I work very hard not to share anything about the transaction or personal information, but I would much rather someone go and work with a realtor they're comfortable with than to be in fear that I'm going to share something I shouldn't share. I totally understand that. Another thing is they've got to be somebody that understands the market and land. I've helped people buy and sell a lot of land. I'm very familiar with the nuances. We live in Wise County, which tends to be more rural. I work in Wise, Montague, Parker, all the surrounding counties. But it's hard to have agents that have only sold properties in a city, in subdivisions, work with land purchases. Not that they're not very knowledgeable. There's just nuances that they are unfamiliar with. And so I don't know what they do know. I don't know what they don't know. I try to share as much information as I can when working with a buyer's agent who is not familiar with land. But it just helps all across the board if you find one that is familiar with land purchases. So when you find a realtor that you feel comfortable with, outline all your needs, your wants, the time frame you're looking at, the price range you're looking at, and ask them any concerns or issues. I'm finding a lot of people have never owned land, and that's great. You can learn, but ask them, help them, or let them teach and train you about land ownership. It can be a lot of fun, but if you're concerned about things or you don't understand things, there's no dumb questions when it comes to land. So just ask them and they will be glad to help you. Now it's time to start looking for the property. Obviously, a lot of people look online. Land property, often you'll have aerial videos of the property, and you can tell a lot from that, or they'll have pictures of the property. But if you have time, drive out to the area. the agent is more than happy to drive you out there. However, a lot of times people want to drive around longer and that kind of thing and get familiar with the area. I know one person that likes to look at the Google view, the Google aerial view or the Google street view. The problem with aerial is that Google does not update that very often. Even our own home, the Google area is several years old, so you can't go by that. Keep in mind too that you're going to have to look at several properties probably before you find the one you want. They're, again, remember, they come in all shapes and sizes, so you may have to adjust your vision based on that. But find the one that you think is going to fit your needs the best. I've had several young families who want properties where they can go for the weekend and hang out, and then in a few years build when they get older, which is great. But a lot of times these properties have restrictions on them that may prevent that. So find that out up front to see if you will be able to do that. You will have to make sacrifices in purchasing this. Also, I know that the market is hot and there is a feeling of urgency, but do not rush into a decision that you'll regret later. I've sold a lot of properties for people who went out, got caught up in the moment, and they bought property and had to pay taxes for several years and had to maintain that property, and then decide later it's not going to work for them, so then they sell it. I'm more than happy to help them sell it, but it's kind of sad. They're very saddened that they weren't able to fulfill their dreams. So make sure you are good with the decision and listen to your realtor. You know, the market is hot, so you're not going to be able to negotiate a lot of times. Sometimes people go in because they don't want to pay what the market requires, and they lose the property. They lose their dream property because they're not willing to pay what the seller's asking, and there's 3 people behind them that are. So keep that in mind. But remember, if you lose out on one property, you will be able to find another. There will be something else that comes up. So once you find the property that you want to purchase, ask your realtor to pull any documentation that they may have. If this property was subdivided a few years ago, you're going to be able to find tax information. Sometimes there's topographical information, like, is there a floodplain? What are the drop-offs? You know, are there pipelines on the property? See if they can help you with all of that information. If there are improvements on the property, such as a septic well, old house, or anything like that, ask them if there's any disclosure forms or anything that will give you any information about that. And make sure you know if there's going to be any restrictions and what the restrictions are going to be. If you have a specific vision for that, it may be that there are restrictions on the property that will hinder that. Your realtor can find that out. So check into that before you make an offer. Now you're ready to actually make an offer. Your agent will drop the contract. At the time you write the contract or sign the contract, once it's accepted, you will have to have 1% of the purchase price to put the earnest money at the title company. So for instance, again, using the example of $100,000, you're going to have a check for $1,000. $200,000, you're going to have a check for $2,000. And that money will have to go to the title company within 3 days of the contract being executed, where both buyers and sellers sign the contract. If there are improvements such as well, septic, old building with electricity, you're going to want to get an inspection by a licensed inspector. In order to do that, you're going to have to give money to the title company to hold for the seller, and it's called an option fee. That money will end up going to the seller later, but it's to allow you the time to get those inspections done. The inspections are usually between 7 and 10 days. You work with the inspector. You will have to pay the inspector at the time of the inspection, and he will make sure, he will check to see if those things are in working order. If they're not, then you can try to get the seller to fix them, or maybe negotiate to come off the price. However, if they're in really bad shape and you decide you do not want the property because that was a major reason for purchasing that property, during that option period, you can withdraw from the contract without penalty, and you can get your earnest money back in full. But once you get past that option period, you may not be able to get your earnest money back. So it's really important to get those things inspected. Now, if it's raw land, there's nothing on it, there's really no need for an inspection. However, you can still opt for an option period. I've had people do the option period because, say, they want a loved one to come look at the property, or say it's a business venture and they want their business partner to look at the property because they didn't get a chance to before. There's a lot of reasons for doing an option period. So that is your right as a buyer to get an option period, but you do not have to get one if you don't see a need for one. So the agent, once they write up the offer, they will send it to the other agent. The buyer's agent will send it to the listing agent, and the listing agent will submit it to the seller, and they'll sit down and talk about it. During that period of time, the seller has 3 choices. They can accept the offer outright, they can reject the offer, or they can negotiate. So if for some reason you came in and you did have a lowball offer and they are looking at it, they may counter back to a higher number closer to their original list price. So don't be concerned or surprised when that happens. But once negotiations are complete, everything's done, everybody has approved and signed, then it will go to the title company, and all the monies have to be deposited at the title company. So you'll either write a check, a cashier's check, or wire transfer, but you only have 3 days to do that. So again, once that takes place, you've got your option period. So during the option period, if you choose an option period, you'll coordinate again with whoever, either an inspector or if you want somebody else to look at the property, and you'll make arrangements to go see that property. It's better to have the inspection earlier rather than later in the option period. So if you have a 10-day option, you'll want to get with that inspector and get him out there as soon as possible. And they know that, so they're good with that. They'll go inspect the property and then ask you to meet them later. They really don't want you there during the inspection, just so they can be focused. They found that a lot of times buyers will see things and ask a lot of questions, and it takes up their time. But this way they can go through the whole property and do their job. Then you can go and meet with them, and they will walk through everything with you. They're really good about that. So you can get that inspection done, and once the inspection is complete, you'll know what's right, wrong, or indifferent about that property, and your agent will get a copy of that report, and y'all can discuss whether you want to request any repairs, back out of the contract, or just move forward. But it has to be completed. All negotiations, all back and forth, everything has to be completed and signed off on by 5 p.m. on the last day of option. And that is very important. That's a Texas rule for realtors. So we have to have that done. After that's done, if there's not a current survey, the survey will be ordered, and we'll just wait on that. So you'll be getting a survey. At that point, you're in full contract. So you can't just decide you don't want the property. You have to move forward. Of course, if you're getting a loan, the lender will be asking for information, and you'll have to get all that done. During that process, the title company will do a title commitment, and that title company goes to both the seller and the buyer. It tells the seller things that may need to be cleaned up on that title. It tells the buyer any restrictions or issues. If for some reason, let's say you want to put a business on that, some sort of business on that property, and your buyer's agent or your agent will get that commitment, they'll look through, and if there is a prohibition to the business, then they'll let you know, and you can withdraw from the contract. There's a place in the contract that allows for that, but you have to do that quickly. But that's where the restrictions will come in. Then the next thing you do is you get ready for closing. A few days before closing, the title company will send a letter to you laying out your final closing costs. Your lender will give you an estimate of the closing cost a few days before, but the title company will send to your agent a layout of the closing cost, a settlement statement, and they will look at it, make sure it's in alignment with the contract, and then they'll tell you how much you need to bring to closing. And you can either wire that money or bring a cashier's check. They will not accept a personal check for closing costs. So you've got to be prepared to do that. Once everybody signs, if it is a cash deal, then you can get the keys to the property and you can access the property. If you got a loan, you can't. So you have to wait until the lender funds. So once everybody signs, all the documentation is sent back to the lender, and then the lender will give approval to the title company to pay the seller their funds. And at that point, that's called funding. When funding takes place, then you can access the property. It's kind of problem, and your agent should tell you when you can access the property. Some sellers on raw land, depending on where it is, they don't really mind if you go out there. It's not a problem. But don't go out there and cut the wires to the fence yet, because it's not a done deal until the seller can get their money. But going out and walking the land sometimes is not a problem. If the seller does not live close to the property, if it's part of that where they live, they might be a little hesitant, but just talk to your agent. They'll be really good. Once it funds, the agent will make sure you get keys and it's your property. So just enjoy your property. And I would love to help you with this process. Just give me a call. Again, I'm Connie Swain, the Connector, connecting you with the information you need about buying land.